Let's rise for our pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, everyone, just a couple announcements. The way that this meeting will flow appears to me to be in 3 segments. The first segment is we're going to do our last of 5 interviews, superintendent candidate interviews. Then there will be a recess in which we are individually looking over the 5 candidates that we have interviewed, which may take some time, obviously, as we are contemplating those things, because our ultimate goal is to gather back together again and bring those 5 down to 2. Once those 2 are named, then we would go into unscheduled audience participation and work our way towards the end of the meeting. And just a little shot into the future, what happens then is those 2 candidates that are selected, there's a second round of interviews, there's site visits, there's things that will be discussed. But I just want you to kind of have a picture of what that is going to look like. Mary, would you do attendance, please?
I shall. President Donnelly?
Here.
Vice President Griffith?
Here.
Secretary Hanser, present. Treasurer Bailey?
Here.
Trustee D'Alessandro?
Here.
Trustee Foster?
Here.
Trustee Schaefer? Here.
Very good, thank you. There are no changes to the board agenda, so we work our way right to our first round interview of Mr. Bidlack. Mr. Bidlack or Todd to the board?
Either one. Todd,
Either one.
Yes, Todd. I prefer Todd, actually.
Okay.
So,
All right, very good. Just want to make sure that we honor your request. All right, very good. So with that, Todd, let me begin by welcoming you. And on behalf of the Oxford Schools, I would like to welcome Todd Bidlack to this interview for the position of superintendent. Mr. Bidlack is the Assistant Superintendent of Learning Services for Bloomfield Hills Schools in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. What I want you to know is that there's 90 minutes that John will be keeping track of. He'll start to tell me when we're 20, 10, and there may be moments, depending upon the questions and answers, we may need to be more concise and move forward. Know that there are 23 questions divided amongst us that you're going to be asked. With time permitting, there'll be a chance for you to maybe ask the board some questions, as well as to make kind of a capsulizing statement at the end, as you've thought about the answers you've given and things that have come to your mind. For everyone, as the board hears from each candidate and weighs this critical decision, it will be doing so through the lens of the candidate profile that was developed with considerable input from our stakeholders. Our intent is to identify the candidate that best fits the profile, which board members have in our packets. For those present in our audience, you may submit feedback by way of the form provided for this purpose. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is the responsibility of the Board of Education as the elected representatives of our community, we value and consider the input of our stakeholders in this process. And so, Mr. Bidlack, Todd, I have the first 3 questions.
Okay.
We've had a chance to see your application, but they haven't. And so what I'd like you to do is briefly review your background and share with us what causes you to be interested in this position at this time in your career.
All right. Well, thank you, President Donnelly and Board of Education. I'd really like to start this evening just by expressing my deepest sympathy and compassion for what has taken place in our community, and just want you to know that my heart is with you, and especially through the last couple months in terms of what those efforts have looked like. I really want to commend you in terms of leading our community forward. So thank you for that. I do think that's a great place for us to start. I know you've read through my resume, but some people may be meeting me for the first time. So I'll just quickly go back through my career and how I'm ending up here this evening. I actually started my teaching career right here in Oxford, at Oxford Middle School. I just visited my classroom a moment ago. I took a little detour and was able to show my son, who's with me tonight, Ryan, and my fiancee, Laura, as well. So took a little bit of a tour to show them where everything got started for me. From them, I had an incredible opportunity to be the interim assistant principal for Oxford Middle School. In fact, I just showed Ryan where I would hang out, where there's good lines of sight, and where I might find students. So, I really appreciate that I launched into education right here. It was Dr. Sage, going way back, who hired me and brought me in, teaching mostly math and science before getting into administration. From there, I had the opportunity to become the elementary principal in Dryden. And if I tell anybody else that, they ask me where that is. But being in Oxford, I know you know where Dryden is, just a little bit north of Leonard. And while I was there, the high school principal had retired. And so then I was moved into the position to be K-12 principal. And then I traveled between both the elementary school and the high school. They only have 2 buildings there, and that made for a very interesting experience where I could be perhaps in a parade going downtown with my elementary students, and then later on in the afternoon I am at a pep rally with my high school students. So that was an incredible experience to work there. In that role, I was also the Title I director, which was really my first opportunity into understanding school finance, as well as how those grant opportunities work, and being able to tag that to programs specifically geared for at-risk students and being able to shape those experiences to help lift those students up. After Dryden, I had the opportunity to become the middle school principal in Clarkson, and it's one of the largest middle schools in the state of Michigan. At the time I was there, I think our enrollment was around 1,500 students at their middle school. And that was an incredible experience to have that large of a school. I really learned a lot through that position. And that's also when I really started to heavily focus in on new pedagogies as it relates to Project Zero out of Harvard, and being able to explore into some of those new ways of teaching that really start to shape one's disposition towards thinking. Rochester had become interested in some of the research that we were doing and recruited me over into their district. And I found myself at that point taking over an elementary school. And then at that time, I'm really immersed into the research and different types of pedagogy. So the work that we did at that elementary school in Rochester was incredibly exciting, and it even made its way to be published in a book. And so that's something that I'm really proud of. From there, I became the assistant superintendent for learning services in Bloomfield Hills. There I oversee all building principals, all operations, as well as help support all of the instructional staff, curriculum, enrollment office, technology department. I'm really heavily involved in all aspects, including bond work, construction, and just the daily operations of the school district. Meanwhile, I live here in Oxford, and this is the place where I chose to live, raise my children, and I have 2 boys. They both attend Oxford High School. Ryan, my oldest, is a senior this year, and I'm thankful that he's here with me. Cole is my youngest. He's a special needs student, and we talked about him. He wanted to come, and then he asked me how long it was going to be. I told him 90 minutes. He said, who on earth would want to do that? So that seemed to be a little long for him. So more than likely, he has the link, so he was going to watch me at home. So he's with me here tonight as well, but he'll have the opportunity to take a break whenever he needs that. I'm here because I love this community. I'm here because I love the school district. I'm here because I've never broke ties with this community. I'm here because I'm extraordinarily passionate about this community, and I believe in our community. I'm here because I believe that I have a unique perspective, and bringing that into the position to be your next superintendent can be incredibly valuable as we move forward.
Thank you. My next two questions, the first is short-term, the second one's long-term, just to kind of prep you for the direction it's going. What do you see are the immediate challenges that you would expect to face as our superintendent within the first 90 days of your job? And with that, what would you set up and do so that you could hit the ground running?
Well, I think within the first 90 days, and actually I'm even going to bring that into within the first week, and I've already started doing some of the preliminary work. So my 90-day plan is already active at this time, and so I've already started to do some of the legwork around some of those pieces to help that transition process. Also, while being very respectful, knowing that I may not be the perfect fit for you, but still as a community member, these would be things that I would want to be working with and engaged in as well. I think some of those immediate challenges is certainly embedding myself into the recovery process, being able to provide a partnership and support the central office team as they move that work forward. I also think in terms of one of the most significant challenges and will be critical to this work is to be accessible, to meet people, to talk to them, to listen, to hear, to be able to, in this time of crisis, establish those relationships. Relationships really are going to be the key to be successful as we move forward. And that would be one of the things that I would be trying to do within days of moving forward. Luckily, I already have very strong and established relationships, not only in the community, but also within the school district as well. And those are opportunities for me to move in and grow that from there. So I think there are significant challenges that we're facing. One of the things that I've been doing already within the 90-day plan that you'll see is putting together resources as well as doing quite a bit of research around school shootings in other areas and looking at what those recovery plans outline, detailed, and then what would be some of the expected things that we would be looking at within the next 5 years. Within that 90-day plan, I try to highlight some of those areas in which we can be proactive, that there are already trends based on the number of incidents that occurred and what those commonalities look like so that we can be very comprehensive in our approach to be able to mitigate those really predictable outcomes that would be occurring within the next few years.
Very good, thank you. Third question is longer term. What do you believe are the 2 or 3 most critical long-term priorities our district will need to address? And how would your background and skills help address those?
You know, really the way that I'm viewing the work that needs to occur, because I'm understanding the question in terms of short range and long range. But really, as I look through that research and the approaches that are taken, I almost think of them as almost like bands or scopes of stages that you move through. And so if you could almost imagine like lining up rubber bands on a table, and each one of those phases has the flexibility, a nimbleness to stretch into other areas, and then another stage begins before the stage before it ends. I think in terms of what's going to be most important is really the health, the mental health of our children and the community as we move forward. That's going to both happen in the short term and in the long term. One of the things I did is I immediately reached out to Congresswoman Slotkin's office and had the opportunity to meet with her staffers to begin some of that legwork in terms of what we would be advocating for, and the funding and the resources to be able to back that up. And so trying to reach out to local officials, making those connections to begin that process in terms of releasing those funds so that we would be able to put those things in place. One of the things I would really be hopeful for, even for my own son, is we're having real conversations now in terms of what next year looks like. Do we go off to college? Maybe we stay home for another year, and I suspect there's a lot of other families considering that for themselves, for their seniors. So some of those needs, both in the long term and in the short term, means that we need better access to internet. if we're going to bring in therapy and yet you really can't go to see somebody in person, and those opportunities, there's not going to be the scalability just within the immediate area. We're going to need to be able to do some of that virtually so that we can connect with therapists anywhere across the nation. And so looking for the funding to be able to do that, where perhaps there are almost like some Oxford promises from this point moving forward, that if you were a student in Oxford between grades 9 and 12, that we would be able to make sure that you stay connected, not only to our staff, but to also have access to therapy within extending out 1 year of being a student here in our school district, so that when we do send our kids off to college, we know that's one of the years where students are most at risk in terms of grades dipping or perhaps not being checked on, that we know that we'd have that safety measure in place, somebody to connect with as they move through that first year. Or perhaps a student moves out at the end of this year. That would still be in place, whether you're in 9th grade or 10th grade, that we're going to have access for that. So one of the things I've been advocating for with Congresswoman is that we would have that funding for students who wouldn't necessarily have the health insurance to cover that, so that would end up being at no cost, but to make sure that measures like that are in place. Also short-term and long-term in terms of these phases of work, one of the things I've done most recently is my neighbor here, actually in Oxford, is the Director of Safety and Security for Mott College in Lapeer and Genesee County. In that, he does a lot of different types of trainings and also makes sure that he's always working through those security features. And I contacted him in terms of the structure of his position and started to ask him, what would that look like in a K-12 setting? Contacted my college, got a hold of all their job descriptions, and we've posted for a Director of Safety and Security to make sure that the district has that work and that it can be amplified, and then also in a more broad range of what that Director of Safety and Security would do. It also allows for game management. It also is looking at how to do a health risk assessment, all of those features in place, and that you can broaden out the term of what safety and security means, especially when you're looking at playground equipment and other type of areas of work in which we'd want somebody's attention to, even traffic flow. So those are some of the things in terms of, I think there are different scopes of work that you're going to move through in those stages, and some of those are going to extend and restrict and need to be flexible in terms of perhaps not having a defined moment in time in which that particular project ends.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
I'm going to turn over the next questioning to Vice President Griffith.
Thank you. Hey, Todd. So let's talk about district relations. Maintaining healthy relationships with the school and community stakeholders is important for the Board of Education. If you could share with us how you've gone about building and maintaining successful relationships with all members of the school community.
Absolutely, that's a very important question. And I have quite a repertoire and a background that's evidenced in the ability to be able to do that. That's actually one of the areas where I really spend a lot of time and attention into establishing those type of relationships. As you get to know me, I have a level of transparency and honesty that I think helps build that type of trust and relationship, that really becomes the foundation at that point. Specific ways that I go about doing that, really at the core of that, I guess I would say is that I make sure that people know that they matter. They matter to me. They matter to our school district. That's what people want to know, that I matter too. And so even working with teachers, whether we're trying to move pedagogy or we're looking at programming, to know that what you have to share in your skill set and what makes you brilliant and what your strengths are, they matter to me. You matter to me. Same thing with community, being able to make those connections. But I think for your next superintendent of Oxford, that this role is going to become even more significant. that we really need to start taking a look at how do we build partnerships with the village? How do we build partnerships with downtown? How do we start leveraging all the strengths of our community so that we can continue to rally together and start being strategic in some of those connections that we want to be able to foster and help move our community forward. The way I move through different types of settings, and in fact, I'll draw back on some of my work with the bond. When I was in Rochester, I had the fortunate opportunity to be one of two people that co-facilitated a facilities review with the district. And through that process of about, I believe it was just under a year, we were able to put together a $180 million bond proposal. And that passed successfully. And that passed successfully because we really brought everybody into that process, and they co-owned that design and how we would be moving that forward. When I went over to Bloomfield Hills, I recognized that they had a significant infrastructure issue as well. And so much so that was interfering with programming as well as alignment. Working in that community, in fact, we didn't have a superintendent at the time, and we still moved forward. And I was at the front of designing what those interactions would look like with the community. And we ended up, again, doing a facilities review that ended with a successful passing of a $200 million bond, in which we're going to be able to go back and reconstruct all of those K-8 buildings. But one thing I want to mention about relationships and connections with the community, hopefully I'm seeing, I hand them to my son, or maybe John already passed this out, but I wanted to give you this book. And really what that book is about, it's about how you make meaning and purpose out of those interactions and bringing people together. I've also included in my 90-day plan and reference around that what the purpose would be. It's called The Art of Gathering and How We Meet and Why It Matters. And within that, it gives case examples of really how you put purpose in that interaction of when people come together, and it's really a human-centered approach. So when people leave that interaction, they feel like they were part of a greater purpose. They understand what it is that we're trying to move forward together with, and they feel like they were a partner in that work. And so I believe that as we start to design those interactions, the intentionality behind that is going to be critical in how we plan those things. So with that, I think that really builds those strong relationships with the community and also with different types of organizations that we'd be working with.
Good. Thank you. What are some examples of community activities in which you've provided leadership, and in what ways did that benefit your district?
Activities that I provided leadership in.
Right.
So the way I'm inferring what that means, activities for in which I'm providing leadership for the community or for inside the district with like teachers, or is it up to my interpretation of what that means?
I think it's in community, in Bloomfield Hills, in Rochester, that you were involved in the things that you mentioned, and
Yeah.
that by doing so, they impacted the district positively.
Yeah, I suppose I've already touched on a few of those in terms of like how to build that visioning together, whether we're creating a strategic plan. Strategic plan processes are very important to engage in the community. So in a couple districts now, I'm usually on the lead front of what that looks like. So any type of visioning work, also with curricular work as well, of how you bring in a curriculum council that really brings parents into that process. So when you're putting those pieces in place, it's reflective of really what the community values and holds true. And that's an opportunity to bring people in a leadership role where they're helping design what the students are going to experience, not only within the physical layout of a building or perhaps a classroom or the type of furniture that you're going to buy or the type of environment that you're creating, that you do that visioning work together. So really that's a part of my daily work that I'm doing, whether we're talking about sex ed curriculum or we are planning for 10 years from now, that always comes with a heavy community engagement opportunity for people to lead in that area.
Okay, good. Thank you. One last question for me. How do we go about creating a district-wide and community-wide culture of continuous improvement, strategic planning, and aligning our actions to achieve those strategic outcomes?
I think strategic planning is incredibly important, and I almost view that a little bit differently than school improvement. Strategic planning to me is a little bit more broad-based, goal-oriented, lofty goals, something that we're trying to achieve together. School districts already have a school improvement process in which you're trying to look for marginal gains. You're forever trying to affect student outcomes and make that experience a little bit differently. But strategic planning can really set the stage for a redesign or imagining something new. Most recently, I'll give you an example specifically for that. Bloomfield Hills is an IB school district just like Oxford is. And what we've noticed with the IB framework is that it doesn't necessarily lend itself well to STEAM opportunities or ingenuity or bring those things, pieces in. However, it does construct a very well framework to be able to coach into different types of thinking dispositions around global competencies and understanding broad ranges of different types of discipline. Yet, here we are in Oakland County in the Midwest. And, one of the things I think that we haven't been necessarily doing well is really bringing kids into being able to make engineering and being able to embed that in. So with that strategic plan and carving out those objectives, we're able to take those things and allow them to blend together. How does the IB start to embrace more of a maker's disposition? I think in the same respect, having looked through the strategic plan, and I also place that within the My 90-Day Plan, is looking for the opportunities where you already have your goals and objectives, but to reinterpret those goals and objectives to now be about recovery, to now be about the emotional welfare of our students and communities. So as you go back through that, all of those pieces now have another layer that they need to bring in. We don't need to have a goal that's separate outside of the strategic plan, but how do you leverage the strengths that are within the strategic plan and those goals to bring in those objectives as well? So now every strength that our district has is now an opportunity to start enacting what that might look. So a couple examples of that is, does our morning circle in our elementary classrooms take on a different purpose now? Is the IB starting to integrate trauma-informed practices in a framework of global competencies? That we can make and reinterpret that strategic plan to pull in those pieces that we know need to be built out in terms of what we want to do in terms of shaping that student experience in the classroom. So it's hitting those other pieces. So that's one of the ways I think of the strategic plan, as well as school improvement, which is going to sit a little bit more in a mechanical base of like, here are the student outcomes. Let's take a look at our alignment for a curriculum. Oh, it turns out that this particular unit isn't aligned or timed out when it should be. The kids are taking the assessment before we're teaching that component, so we need to do a realignment. So those are some different ways that I interpret that.
Thank you. Mr. Bailey.
Good evening. Let's switch gears and look at some of the finance topics. Please describe your experience with budget development, financial management, and highlight having to make difficult budget cuts.
It was budget development and
Financial management?
financial management. Okay. Probably one of the areas where, because the last part of that question was to talk about where you've had to make some tough choices. So that really took me back to the financial crisis that we are in. And at the time that was occurring, I was at Sashwell Middle School in Clarkson. And as a district, I believe that I believe at the time, we were trying to cut costs by $32 million. And then at my middle school alone, the target range was for $8 million. That's probably one of the most significant times I remember in terms of really trying to take a look at those budget items and trying to reduce the impact on the classroom and taking all steps to do that. One of the innovative ways that we were able to do that at that time was to take a look at the structure of those support classes and redesign those so that kids didn't necessarily have to be available in the schedule at a specific time, that we could rework the schedule and give them actually more time for intervention than what we could before, yet it needed less staff to be able to do that. So moving into those situations where you're really trying to keep that impact out of the classroom and away from it affecting student learning, and trying to design into those pieces. I've also had the opportunity to really have a good eye into the inequities of how schools are funded. And I think that's actually probably one of the first places to start. Yes, as a superintendent, you would be involved in trying to guide and provide oversight in terms of what that any type of budget reduction or that process would include. But even before that, as a board and that as a superintendent, advocating in Lansing and Washington for the type of resources a community like Oxford deserves, and that those inequities need to be addressed, and that a district like Oxford should be able to get the funding in which is more equitable across the state. So I think that's one of the things that we would want to do in terms of what that budget plan would look like, is try to be proactive in some of those features. It's also one of the reasons why I felt it was important to reach out to Congresswoman Slotkin's staffers to be able to start carving a path for what may be some of those additional resources that we'd be able to leverage here in Oxford as we begin to really kind of put those plans and actions in place that will cost more money. ESSER funds will not be enough to be able to do that, but I've had a real opportunity to be able to be intimately involved in all aspects of business finance, as well as making large and small decisions around that, whether it's on a quarterly basis or a daily basis. I'm actively involved in that type of work. But moreover, I think it's important to really be skilled at anticipating what the trends are and what to expect as you're moving into that. And so one of the things that we noticed was the teacher shortage that was in front of us, and as well as coming out of the pandemic and the sheer exhaustion that teachers were facing. And we were really worried about being able to replace them. But we were able to, this year, using some of those ESSER funds, reduce our class sizes by hiring extra staff, hoping that would also put us in a position, because we try to do that at a rate that's consistent with our attrition, our normal attrition rate. And so that we would be able to move through this year of having lower class sizes, but yet all that really could do is impact our hiring strategy in the spring, yet not having that come off the general fund because we're using ESSER dollars for that. We also put in place retention bonus for teachers that would return for this school year, to make sure that maybe that year and that work, that we'd have a few less retirements or resignations than that would normally occur in any given school year, to help keep that staff in place. So that's positioned us well to be strong in this next hiring season, which the outlook for that is really depressing at this point in terms of the lack of people going into education and what that's going to look like. That's another thing that I've been advocating very hard for, in terms of releasing funds to be able to put in a similar structure, because when you look at what has occurred after Parkland or Sandy Hook, there is a real trend to have significant turnover, both administration and at the teacher level, within the next 3 to 5 years. It doesn't occur immediately, but it does start to build up exponentially as you move through those first few years. And I think we want to be able to honor that, because some people's journey in healing will mean moving on to something else. And some people's journey to healing will mean staying right here with us. And we want to be able to honor and support either direction that might head in. But we also want to take measures to help mitigate what that turnover would look like. And that's why I was advocating for funding to be released in terms of what could be a 5-year structure on those retention incentives to be able to keep staff in place, to encourage them to stick with us, as well as making sure that we have the mental health components that our staff is able to heal as they journey along with us over the next few years. So I think those things are really important, yet is also going to be very unique and specific to our school district moving forward.
Thank you. What opportunities do you believe budget limitations present? And in tough financial times, what are your top 3 priorities?
Well, budget limitations always spur innovation. And because that's the opportunity to be creative, that's the opportunity to think a little bit differently. That how do we do something in a unique way that could actually contribute to the general fund. I know one of the areas that Oxford should be extraordinarily proud of is OVA and how that structure helps support the district. And that became an innovative way, in fact, really kind of a standard of how you might approach virtual learning opportunity. One of the things that I've done most recently is taking a similar approach, looking at alternative education with Bowers Academy. You may not know this, but when you drive down 75, just before the Troy exit, there's a large farm sitting there. That's one of our schools, and that's also where we have our alternative ed, our Bowers Academy. And when I first arrived there, it was almost like that environment was invisible, that it wasn't really being leveraged. It was an extra building that kids were going to have a different setting. But you could almost move that anywhere. It wasn't specifically related to the farm. So the farm is really kind of in place, and yet you have this alternative ed program that's located there because that's where an extra building was. Well, revisioning all of that, putting together a new strategic plan, and really carving out what we might do in that arena, as well as at the same time making sure that costs were coming down. Because generally speaking, an alternative education program will run a deficit, and that's okay to do that. That can be expected sometimes. But in this particular way, we weren't leveraging the property that was sitting there. So now I have students that are working with farm animals, who are doing guided tours, who are now developing a more of a sense of belonging, as well as the therapy that comes along when you're working with animals. Being able to take that program and repositioning it into a highlight and a strength for the district, and then looking at new opportunities for kids to tuition into that program and or come in under schools of choice, allows us to hit a healthier enrollment level where we can start balancing that out. That we have, based on the facility and the staff that needed, we can make sure that we have enough students there, in terms of that being a little bit more of a budget neutral endeavor. So those are some of the ways in terms of how that can really drive innovation. And I think as we move forward, we'll need to continue to really think about the strategies and the innovative ways in which we can retain enrollment, and what those projections might look like, as well as already kind of what's out in front of us with Northern Oakland County, is looking at those birth rates. Don't look that healthy 2, 3, 4 years out already.
Thank you.
Bowers Academy?
Powers Academy.
Bowers, with a B,
Bowers.
yes, yeah. It's right off 75. It's this large farm. You can see it right from the highway.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you kind of already touched on this one, but what ideas might you explore to raise money for the district, and have you had success procuring those additional funds?
So sorting through a couple different ways in which I could move into answering something like that. And I think first I want to touch on is really considering creating a political action committee. And because what happened here is not unique to Oxford. And the county and the state also need to have a reaction to this. And part of that support can also come in dollars and funding in order to help sustain as well as being able to rebuild. I really think it's important that we put together a political action committee and we start asking for the needs that the community has with a very coherent strategic plan that's going to touch on what these meaningful points are and being able to outline specifically what those needs are and what we're trying to accomplish with them. I've touched on a few of them already in terms of what is a sustainable approach to making sure that students have access to mental health providers, even beyond being a student here, at least 1 year beyond that. And and my first thought there is with our seniors going off to college, and then moving on, extending that into what I've been advocating for is the funding around directors of security and safety, being able to have something like that in place to be able to support districts. It does appear that we need to move beyond just having some SROs, but rather, once a body of work becomes so substantial that it starts to take place of a directorship. I think what's going to be critical as we move forward is, and one of the lessons that they're learning with these tragedies that have occurred before ours, is that there really needs to be in place a recovery coordinator, that the work becomes so significant and large that you really need to be able to staff into that. Asking for that funding, being able to put together that outline of what that would look like is going to be critical in terms of being able to make sure that that is in place. What they've learned is that when that is not in place, it consumes the infrastructure because the current infrastructure and staffing is not built to meet that need. And it ends up stretching that work and deprioritizing other important aspects within the district that still need to be able to move forward. So I think one of the areas first is to really look at advocacy and making sure that we are asking for the funding that we're going to need in order to put these different aspects into place to have a real comprehensive plan, especially within the next 3 to 5 years, as well as meeting some of our immediate needs. The other thing is to always be extending out and looking at the resources that you have, making sure that you are bringing those into alignment and that you're positioning your staff to have the most impact in terms of how you're building out your schedules, what those features look like in your programming, and taking a look at the opportunities where you might be able to bring in more revenue than what that is costing, and really making sure that some of those projects are in place as well.
Thank you. I will hand it over to Ms. Schaefer.
Thank you. Hi, Ted. So superintendents are always faced with unpopular decisions, making decisions where there doesn't always seem to be a clear answer, and the public wants it a certain way. And so talk about a time when you were faced with a difficult decision to make and you had to deliver it to a group of people that may have been unhappy with the decision, and kind of how you moved forward with that and tried to bring them along, bring them on board.
Yes, that is part of these jobs.
Yeah.
And but I think your question is really getting to like, how do you move people through that? And my approach is to make those decisions in a very student-centered way. And when you do the right things for the right reasons, that's very easy to defend. That's very easy for people to accept, and maybe even just, well, I feel a little bit differently about that, or I would have prioritized it in a different way. But I really believe in doing the right things for the right reasons, and then those decisions end up being student-centered, and they don't become controversial. When I went into Bloomfield Hills, that district was entering into a time of a lot of turmoil. And my role within that has really just been to be a foundation and to help that district continue to move forward. In that time, I've been able to lead a bond proposal that received $200 million to rebuild the schools, primarily the elementary and middle schools, and being able to move the district through a new strategic planning process and being able to hit these large milestones while yet making those tough decisions in which you might have to cash some of that back in with those relationships that you're trying to move forward. But again, I really find that if you just stay grounded around student-centered decisions and you're able to explain and articulate that in a compassionate way, that it really doesn't stay in a moment where you're just stuck there. We move on and beyond it. Some of the most sensitive things are when something that someone is really passionate about, maybe that program gets restricted down a little bit or gets moved into a different set. People can really feel emotional about that, and I think honesty and transparency is really important in that aspect. And then you also bring people into the process of co-designing beyond what you're looking at that time. So the way I move through that and I stay connected with individuals while making tough decisions is through transparency, honesty, staying student-centered, and being able to explain and articulate why, even though this decision is hard, why it's the right thing to do for kids.
Okay. How do you lead without having official authority over people? So, like, have you been in that situation before? So maybe you have to lead a group, but they don't necessarily report to you.
Yes, all the time throughout my career. A lot of the work that I do is community-based. There is no reporting structure when you're working with the community. In fact, in actuality, the reporting structure is flipped at that point because, my role in education as administrator, I do work for the community. At the same time, I'm balancing that with the needs of my staff and trying to bring all of that together to make sure the way we're moving forward is best for kids and it's student-centered. So working with the community, there is no reporting structure, but yet you're trying to put together large-scale visioning pieces. You're trying to shift pedagogy. You're trying to shift purpose or why school. And sometimes those changes can occur in a way that people aren't necessarily used to, or you have to bring in the buy-in process with that. So there's actually quite a few opportunities for that to take place, and it's actually part of the normal cycle in terms of doing some of that curriculum work and strategic planning, bond work, construction work, the way we're going to transition students, because now we have to relocate. Probably one of the most recent things I did was lead redrawing inter-district boundary areas, which if you haven't had the pleasure to do that work yet, believe me, you are lucky. There's nothing more unpopular than redrawing elementary boundary lines and having to switch schools. Well, it was important to do that work, and the why behind that was we were trying to move our elementary students back to our elementary schools and get them out of the middle schools, because for that district, there is a real need to go from 3 middle schools down to 2 middle schools. That took a lot of work, not only internally but externally with the community. And we landed on a configuration with our reporting structure with those community members. And I'm going to go back to this book again because there's a very specific reason why I thought of that and why I brought it here today. It's in the design and the purpose of why you come together. As you co-construct together, reporting structures don't matter because you are flattening the reporting structure altogether. So oftentimes when I am moving through curricular work or large-scale planning, even inside the district, I am always trying to flatten that power structure so that you really are getting the best ideas, and that is all getting co-constructed together. So with the catchment areas, we were able to move through that. We've redrawn district boundary lines, and you know, and that district is about the same size of this district. And after all that work was done, there were 3 emails. So if you can redraw catchment areas and exhaust that work, the meetings with the PTOs, working with neighborhoods, we got all of that down to 3 emails by the time those changes occurred.
Okay. What are the key elements needed to establish and maintain a good working relationship between a superintendent and a board?
Oh, definitely transparency, honesty, good communication, and those are going to be really important to me. What's also really important to me is that working together as a group of 7, that I'm hearing one voice, even though there may be 7 different opinions. It makes it very difficult if the board is fractured and has 2 sets of priorities. That can be really disruptive in a school setting. My impression and the research that I've done on this board is that it really does come together in terms of united front. There are varying opinions, but then also knowing that together as a team, moving forward in one direction really ends up benefiting the school because it provides focus and clarity, and it starts to carve out specific outcomes, achievable outcomes that we know we are trying to set a path for. When a board becomes fractured or isn't working together, that becomes really problematic because I'm not sure, well, are these the top priorities that I'm hearing over here, or are these the top priorities? I'm being asked to prioritize the work in 2 or 3 different ways. Perhaps we can't agree on what the goals of the district should be or the superintendent goals. So that's very important to me, and based on you know, my research already. In fact, you know, I thought it was fair that if I was going to give you my resume, I also took the time to see, you know, what is the professional experience that you have. I think our skill sets line up very well, and I'm excited to learn from you in fields that I haven't necessarily been part of, and I think you bring very good insights into that. But I think for those board relationships, it's really going to have a lot of important elements for that is going to be establishing trust, and trust coming out of doing purposeful work together, clear communication, transparent communication, and timely communication, and being accessible.
Okay. Last question for me. Given what you know about our district in your research, what do you believe our vision for the future should be?
Well, you know, the vision for the future for our district is for people to know and recognize how special this community is. I think that's probably the work we should be engaged in. Outside of that, if we're going to talk about programming or opportunities for kids, I'll probably sound much more technical in that work. There's all sorts of things we can look at in terms of pathways, how kids might be dual enrolled, making sure that we have opportunities, different type of choices, making sure that we're really attending to the needs of our staff and students and families. But I think our vision as we move forward is about restoration and rebuilding. And I think that's going to be important and meaningful work. And I'm going to let the next question come to me. So, and I'll probably come back to that thought in a little bit. So, okay.
Eric?
Hi, I'm going to take over. Please give us an example of educational change or reform that you have initiated in your career that have led to improvements in student learning.
Okay, so I am going to try not to talk for a half hour and think about how I can sum that up. That is my favorite work. I can sit down and talk to you for hours about Project Zero, cultures of thinking, innovator's mindset, a maker's disposition, ingenuity in the classroom, the neuroscience that sits within our instruction, best practices to use, and how programming affects the student experience. I think one of the most intriguing things lately is the neuroscience around developing a sense of belonging and a belongingness into a classroom, and how you develop that relationship with a student. But not only are you developing the relationship from a teacher to a student and developing relationships between student and a student, but also attending to the relationship between the student and learning. And so like one of the most fragmented relationships you usually come across with is with math. And in fact, a lot of adults will admit that the relationship with mathematics is not very strong. But you know, how do you start switching that back around in terms of having a personal connection to what it is that you're learning, and that you might not be strong in that yet, but understanding the neuroscience, when a child can understand that they are working on the synapses in their own brain, that yes, this is hard today, but what I'm really doing right now is I'm strengthening the rods within my brain to understand this at a deeper level. I really think education is about developing dispositions and habits of thought, and allowing a child to be able to develop a nimbleness of mind, that they're going to be able to take what they learn, the consequence from being a student here in Oxford, and be able to carry that forward through a life of opportunities. And so whether we want to talk about programming, special ed programming, literacy designs, you know, I have spent a career researching, building out practice. There are some of my schools that have been highlighted in different texts, and that's probably one of the, you know, that's something that's I'm very passionate about, and I love to be engaged in that type of work.
Okay, thank you. What is the biggest risk you have taken to do what's right for children?
Boy, the first one that came to mind, and if I paused a little bit longer, I could probably come up with more. But the one that comes to mind first right away, and it's probably a little bit more personal to me. Anytime dealing with anything related to special education, I feel that as a father too. And in fact, some of my favorite connections to make are with families with a special needs child. I know, like, I understand. I am part of that group. I am part of that parent group. So I face some of those same challenges. I have some of those same worries. I have some of those same stressors. And so my ability to toggle back and forth between being a school administrator and a parent is incredibly easy in those moments. And I think probably one of the most daring things I've done is going into Bloomfield Hills. There were a lot of concerns around the programming around special education, and looking into that, you really could see programming that wasn't necessarily connected or tied to how students move progressively through a school system. And so, with a little bit of change, hired a special education director, started working on redeveloping a special education pack and bringing parents into that process, and then working with Michelle Harmala, put her on contracted services. She is currently working out of a university and is a former superintendent and an expert in the field of special education. Together, putting together with the PAC, a coalition to create a strategic plan specifically for special education. Out of that work, we came up with a new design that's really more around the levels of support as opposed to the classification that you would have in an IEP, to make sure that students have accessibility into, or they have access to, all different types of levels of support that would sit within a school. And that the specific cert might not be the driver in terms of what it is that you need today or what it is that you need over the next month, but rather, do we have the programming in place for a child to move in and out of that? That's very difficult work to do because organizations have muscle memory. They have organizational habits. They have, you're trying to take some steps forward, but what the organization knows, it will slide back into. So what was daring about that is to move that forward knowing that we were going to experience some of that, but it was the right thing to do for our children with special needs, and putting those features in place so that they had more of an opportunity to be successful, and it's working very well. So I'm extraordinarily proud of that work. I felt like that was an opportunity where we were being really courageous, because when you're doing something new, it's very hard to explain the mechanics behind that, because you almost have people really understand something when they live it. And that's the theory with transformational leadership. That, do people really change their beliefs before they change their practice, or do you change practice and then people change their beliefs? Oftentimes it actually is changing practice and experience. And then once people have that, then beliefs start to change after that. So that's one of the first things that came to mind around of really demonstrating transformational leadership, bringing parents into the process, creating that strategic plan, and then reshaping the way we have our special education services model, and how that's going to continue to grow as we move forward.
Okay. Well, it's a good lead into our next question.
Okay.
So, in general, what do you believe are currently the biggest challenges in special education in our region, and how would you address those challenges?
Well, the first obvious one, so I don't want to move past it, is funding for special education. It is incredibly underfunded, and it's important to be advocates in that work. As our political leaders, as a board, that's really an opportunity to engage and stay engaged, is to really continue to advocate for the resources and the funding to be able to have those systems and processes in place for our special education students. Within our region, the last couple of years has really, because what we know is any time, whether it's programming or environmental conditions, that when something isn't working well, our most vulnerable students will be impacted the most. So as we think about the last couple of years, as we think about the last couple months, our most vulnerable students will have the most significant impact. So were you already impacted by anxiety? Are you a student that presents with a learning disability? I've seen the regression in my own son. Even within the week of him returning to school, of what that looked like. And I'm a parent bringing in a lot of knowledge for special education. It takes a lot of coaching to be able to move past some of those hurdles, and then seeing some of them back that haven't been there for a couple years. So I do believe that it's critical, and that is an area of growth for this district that I think is real and present, and would be something that I would be excited to be engaged in, and something that's very personal to me. And I do think that that's actually probably one of the areas for the most growth within Oxford.
Okay, thank you. How would you meet the needs of college readiness while also providing a high-quality, relevant, career-focused opportunity for students?
I really think that comes through experiential learning opportunities that are project-based, and that they come with a lot of purpose and meaning for that you're really teaching towards broad skills that become transferable from this career to another career. And I think that's extraordinarily important for the age of our high school students in terms of what their path is going to look like as they move into adulthood. All the research is suggesting that they might have several different careers. So those skills need to be transferable from one area to another. And some of the best ways to do that is through really kind of blending some of those disciplines. And the way I refer to that a little bit is not necessarily how you're teaching towards into the discipline, but how you teach outside the discipline and how you start bringing some of those other aspects in. So I think those experiential learning opportunities is a good way through your programming as well as the instructional model that's taking place can do that. But it's also making sure that there are pathways. And I know Oxford already has some of those in place. What we've done in Bloomfield is carve out some of those pathways so that if a student has a specific course in mind, they can jump into a biomedical pathway right now. They can start exploring that at a deeper level, that when they get into a university, they already have a couple years of learning mathematics within the field of biomedical engineering, that they've already had the experience of being able to do some of those things. One of the things I think is most relevant, and I worry that education has gotten too far away from, is really bringing in science, making, ingenuity, STEAM. My father was in skilled trades. And I think we underestimate the power, especially within our region, to keep that at the forefront, to really spark learning through making and what type of thinking disposition that develops. One of the ways that we're doing that as well is as when we take those courses, and the direction that we'll be moving to is after we do a project like that is also to take survey information from the students in terms of what they liked and did not like. And it's important to break down that information by gender as well. Because if we find that specific types of engineering are too skewed in terms of like 80% of our boys say that they really enjoyed the way we move through that unit, but only 20% of girls, well, then that means we're structuring an environment that is really going to coach our girls out of taking classes similar to that. So really what we're trying to do is track that information and make sure that we're bringing in those making and STEAM and engineering opportunities in a way that isn't going to have a predictable gender outcome from that. And it's important to understand the ratios too. So, because oftentimes, like if I say we want to move from 80-20 to 50-50, what people hear is, oh, will that mean that less boys are interested? Not at all. Just the same amount of boys. And in fact, sometimes, usually when you find that the boys' numbers increase as well, but rather when you put those two percentages together, it just means that those are more equal parts. So the 80-20, there just may be a more skewed number to that, but really what you're trying to do is get that number to where a lot of your kids are expressing interest and there's not a predictable outcome for that.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Just
Yeah.
jot that down. Todd, first of all, welcome. As we know, in our society, we have elections from time to time. We can never guarantee who's in a seat, whether it be on this board, whether it be anywhere. So I want to touch upon political awareness. So understanding that governmental positions change from time to time, what are your biggest concerns regarding the political climate of education in Michigan? And as our superintendent, how would you advocate for political action that benefits our district and furthermore, public education throughout our state as well?
Absolutely, and that's very important to be politically involved because it has a significant impact on education with each election cycle, not only the election cycle, but the outcome of the election cycle as well. And I don't think, my entire time in education, particularly in the last 10 years, education is always part of any type of political matchup. But now it's playing even more of a significant role in terms of how people are campaigning and bringing education into that process, in which you're almost feeling as though that campaign is starting to take place in your school or in your classroom. So I think it's really important to for people to be able to identify that so that they can stay politically neutral and help navigate those situations in the classroom, because, you know, as public educators, we are politically neutral. You only have one person as an employee that really is not restricted and bound to political action, and that would be your superintendent. So as your superintendent, I think what we would do is prioritize in which we think needs to have the most political influence, and where are the pressure points that we see that would have the most significant impact on our community first, and then within our region, and then in our state. So I feel like we would do that work together in terms of setting that agenda, in terms of political action, as well as knowing that several of you are probably affiliated with different types of action committees, or if nothing else, there is a lobbying firm already associated with Michigan School Boards Association. There are as well for different types of organizational models, and a lot of times they are bringing forward briefs in terms of, here's a piece of legislation that is going through, here's how it will impact schools. And I think it's really important to always be updated on each one of those pieces, so you know that you can head something off if that's moving forward and it's going to have a negative impact on our district. Staying politically active is extraordinarily important, and in particular, I think it would be important that as a group, because I would guess that out of 7 individuals, your politics sit in very different ways, and it would be important that collectively that we're trying to prioritize that work that is reflective of our community, but yet is also setting clear targets in which, how do we want to influence the political structure, what are we specifically advocating for, what bodies of legislation are we for, what bodies of legislation do we want to help prevent, and then also what are we advocating for that isn't necessarily being talked about right now. So those would be some of the ways that that come to mind in which we would do that work together.
Thank you. Politics just does not.
Sorry, this was never on. My apologies. Politics does not just stop at Lansing. We often find here in Oxford that they probably right around Indianwood Road, and that's Lake Orion and the districts to the side, and we're very, very grateful for the support that they've given us. But what are specific ways in which our district should be working with other local districts, not just Lake Orion, but all of us around us, to help meet our students' achievement goals and assist them with theirs?
Absolutely. There are already reports out about this. In fact, I helped give feedback into some of those funding inequities that exist, and I've been able to see those firsthand, and the manner in which that plays out. So, specifically around budget and finance is probably where some of the most significant pressure could be leveraged right now to benefit Oxford. That, as a school district, we are not receiving the funding that this community deserves, or would be proportionate with districts within our immediate area. And a lot of those figures and foundation allowances were set decades ago, and this region has significantly changed since those standards were set. So I think it's incredibly important to continue to advocate for those pieces. So you first have just the general fund pieces in terms of the inequities that sit within that we'd want to continue to press upon. And then also going back to, because there's already research out there and it's published about the true costs of education. And then also bringing in the inadequate funding that we're experiencing for students with special needs, and bundling those two things together, I think could have a significant impact if we could make headway on that.
And my final question is, what impact has standardized testing and teacher accountability had on our education system here in Michigan?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I can answer that in a couple different ways. The most negative impact is with the way that information gets ranked and used. So the way that is expressed outwardly in terms of really trying to compare districts against each other is not really reflective of the work that's going on within those different districts. And it's also not reflective of the funding disparities either. You know, if you just take some of those different components within the standardized assessment in terms of its impact, as well as what the student experience is on the user's end, and what is the purpose actually for that assessment, and does it really have any significant gain on the data that we extrapolate from it. At the same time that those structures are faulty systems and that they do not truly reflect of what's taking place, they are not figuring in childhood poverty. There are several features in which those outcomes are not balanced in terms of what it is really trying to communicate. With that in place, however, we still want to have our students to be successful on a genre of assessments, knowing that they're going off into a university and they're going to be taking different type assessments. We want them to experience different ways of being measured, but we don't necessarily want them penalized because they don't do well on one specific genre of assessment. So what's important to do is internally with different types of assessment philosophy is to have multiple points in which you can collect that data. And it's okay that if we have a data set and one is askew from that, well, that's just one. But if they all line up, then that really is starting to outline, you know, either for this particular student or for this grade level, we need to take a look at perhaps some programming shifts or different ways to support students. But standardized assessment has been problematic in the way that data gets used at a state level and national level. And I think that's been extraordinarily problematic.
Thank you. Mary?
Hi, Todd.
Hi, Mary.
How would you interact with other administrators in our district? How would you strike a balance between giving them the support and autonomy they need to lead effectively while holding them accountable as appropriate and necessary?
Well, I believe in relationships and accountability, and I think one of the most healthy things you can do is to be upfront, transparent, and honest. I think I do that currently with all the administrators that report to me, and as the Assistant Superintendent for Learning Services, you know, all of most of the administrative staff in the district do report into my reporting structure. So assistant principals, the curriculum department, all of those aspects kind of filter to me. And one of the ways that I do that is I do establish relationships, but it's always around meaningful and purposeful work. And really trying to align what our vision is going to be. And then also sometimes just kind of reminding myself, well, I'm not the principal of that school. And I do need to give some flexibility in terms of what expectations around a design or decision. So I try not to, I'm definitely not a micromanager unless that's what's needed. So I feel like I have the ability to adapt my leadership based on the situation that's occurring, and then to provide the type of leadership that's needed within that situation. So I try to adapt to what I think is needed with each person that I'm trying to support. I think I try to run a balance between being a servant leader as well as being a transformational leader. So I'm constantly growing, and really at the heart of it, I'm still a coach, and that's how, I used to coach when I was much younger, and I don't feel like I've ever really kind of let go of that approach. That I'm here for you, and we're going to grow together. I'm going to learn from you. You're going to learn from me, and we're going to keep things. We're going to keep things engaged. We're going to stay connected, and we're going to be involved in each other's work.
What would you suggest in terms of a comprehensive professional development plan for our educators? Specifically, what would be the key priority areas as well as the delivery system?
Well, the way you would go into that work is you would start working with teachers to see what it is that they feel they need to grow in the areas of. So I'm a strong believer in teacher leadership. And so I'll give an example of what I mean by that. Some of the areas that we start in first, perhaps we're taking a look at workshop practices, but there are a lot of different instructional components within a workshop practice around literacy. So we might move into that in terms of gathering some of that data back of within these different areas, where do you feel like you are looking for more support? What do we need to spend more time and looking at? Conferring is often one that will come up in terms of that is a little bit more complicated to do that. In terms of the practices that are taking place within that workshop model, conferring with your students, taking those running notes, being able to coach a student, because it's really a coaching model for a student with their own writing. And that's a hard practice. I mean, it takes teachers years to become exceptional in that area, but when they do, it's magical, and students can make significant gains in their writing with a teacher that is very skilled in conferring. So I think it's assessing what it is that teachers are looking for. Where are they looking to grow their practice? Aligning that to the professional development schedule in terms of looking, boy, we have a lot of teachers that are looking for this. We have other teachers that are looking for this. Let's try to set our focus so that we're providing that experience back. It may also be in a way in which we're trying to roll out professional development, knowing that we have this initiative coming. Maybe there's an IB reauthorization about to take place in the next couple of years. And then how do we want to prepare for that reauthorization? What are some, you might start with a survey in terms of how are we doing in these different scopes and these different areas so that we can start building out those units in a different comprehensive way and integrating new practices in it. My hunch right now would be, because even in my own district, we have really prioritized in the last 18 months socio-emotional wellness, trauma-informed practices. We just had a national speaker last night. Luckily, the snow day didn't get in front of it. Actually, I guess you could really combine those together because we could almost say that was a wellness day, mental health day. So I'm not sure if that was more of a snow day or just a mental health day. And then having that national speaker and as well around what are some of those trauma-informed practices in terms of how you're really trying to reset the mind, how you're moving students through the ability to process and regulate emotions, and how that instructional design promotes that. I alluded to that a little bit as well, is how do you take your strengths already and now embed what are some of our most significant needs right now. So how do you leverage a professional development calendar and professional development opportunities to be able to provide the support for teachers to maneuver their classrooms in new ways that is going to support students' emotional health. So I think that's important to do, that teachers are really giving voice into what that professional development is going to look like and how it's going to be focused, and that you're trying to meet their needs. Balancing that with perhaps a vision or an initiative that the district is going to do in which you're trying to prepare people to be successful in that, trying to put both of those together simultaneously.
Please describe your experience with labor relations and negotiations, highlighting how you have been able to reach agreements that are fair for everyone without compromising too much simply to avoid conflict. Also, in one word, how would the president of your teachers union describe you?
Well, in all settings, I'm not that great of a negotiator. So the first example I'm thinking of is I've been pretty consistent at home that we're not going to have pets. And there is a dog, a cat, 2 rabbits, and I had really pushed back on all of those pieces. There's talk about a goat now, And I am fearful that that is just really carving out the pathway for a horse right behind that. So I'm trying my hardest to really kind of keep that line, and I'm not doing well on that front at all. At work, however, I really move into that process in a very honest way. I would call it interest-based bargaining. There's very few situations that we can't figure out how both groups, administration and or the board, with our teachers are going to have common interests. We both want the district to be financially well. We both want the district to be able to provide everyone with appropriate health care and benefits. We both want you to be compensated fairly. We both understand that we have to work within the limitations of the budget that we have. So we work through that in a process, and I've been a part of all sorts of different types of negotiations. I've been part of traditional bargaining, interest-based bargaining. Clarkson uses an accord process. So I'm well versed in a lot of different types of negotiations. And in fact, in my 90-day plan, I put in there that one of the things I would want to do within that first 90 days is make sure that I'm meeting and making myself available for each representative or president of each affiliated group, and really providing them an opportunity of what are some of those needs, so I can anticipate what are some of the things in the contract that have been ongoing conversations. But I think the best approach to that is you really have two sets of negotiations occurring simultaneously. You're going to have these milestones, which are going to be a little bit more about compensation packages, benefits, as well as calendar. And those are areas in which you need to come to a common understanding where your finance or your CFO is coming in and forming that work. Here's what we think is going to happen within the next 12 months, couple years. Here's where we think we need to be conservative. And that those are really a little bit more structured conversations, and they tend to span out, and those agreements might take place over like 2 to 3 years. The rest of the contract, though, in terms of what might be working conditions or maybe just the way we're going to operate within that contract, all sorts of different aspects in there that are not financially related. I really feel that you can have a structure in place that's an ongoing conversation. And at any time, yes, if the contract's not working for you, it's not working for us. If the contract's not working for us, it's not working for you either. So let's come together on this, let's in a collaborative way and figure out how we can adjust this so we can move through a practice that's not working well that we've identified. So I think being open to that process, and a lot of times just coming to a letter of agreement can help maintain a contract during its longevity, whether you have a 2, 3, or 4-year contract, trying to make sure that you're doing that ongoing maintenance. So you're not trying to do all of that work in those cycles, that is just ongoing work. I think the last part of that question was, in one word, how would the union president? Okay, so what would Phil say? Well, one of the things is I have contacted our union president as well as our UniServe director that serves our region, and I had asked them to open a door to anybody in Oxford that has questions about me. So I've asked them to reach out to the UniServe director that serves Oxford, as well as a few other districts, as well as Jim Gibbons, to make sure that they felt like they could have any type of conversation. And because really my approach is to be transparent and honest. And so I invite any of those conversations. If I only could choose one word, I believe that I believe he would describe me as collaborative, and if that wasn't the word, perhaps approachable, attentive. I'm cheating now. I'm cheating on how many words, but I guess my point there is we have a good relationship and we understand each other's roles. We don't always see things eye to eye, but we always work everything out.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we have about 5 minutes, and the 23 questions are over. maybe there might be a question or two that you might want to ask the board, and this would be an opportunity to do that. And then after that is for you to provide some closing statements. But anything that you might have for the board.
You know, what I would ask of the board at this time is really kind of moving into, you know, trying to sort out in your own minds, what does the next couple months look like? What is the next 6 months and a year? You know, sort of these time frames. How would you start prioritizing that work, thinking both short term, and I guess I would define that as within the next year, from here to this time next year? Because the first phase of the work of getting the doors open, that's been successful. And now as you move away from that work of getting kids back into the building, you know, a year, 3 years from now, what are some of the things that lift into your mind to be of utmost importance?
Anybody want to speak to that?
The top priority continues for us to be the safety of our staff and our students. The physical safety, the emotional safety, and long-term. So that's the first and continuing priority.
Thank you. Dan?
Thank you. And I think to expound on what Mary said, the safety of our staff and our students are very important, but we also have to try to figure out what that balance looks like. Because we have, if you take everything into account, we have nearly 10,000 students in our district, whether it's seated or OVA. And with that number, we have 10,000 or so different levels of learning, different levels of needs, educationally and emotionally. So I guess how I would answer that question to you is, within the first 2 months, if we're looking at that, we really need to focus in on how do we get the emotional needs back? How do we get them met? And it's not just by who we have here in the district, because as you know, being an educator, it's a push and a pull. You've got to push ourselves towards the kids, and we've got to pull those resources outside of the county towards us and say, we need more. When that happens, we're going to serve those kids and our staff in the next 2 months. But a year out from there, that's a difficult task, because as we know, 90 days ago or so, we're not thinking about what we're thinking about today. So we don't know what's going to happen in 6 months, but what I can tell you is the expectation of the board is to be able to move rapidly when those changes happen, with one focus in mind: staff and student. So that's where I would go.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
He's only got 2 minutes. Go ahead.
The other thing that I would add, all great points. I think the other piece is rebuilding trust, right? Just so the community knows that they can trust us, they can trust the superintendent, and they can feel comfortable sending their kids into the buildings.
Thank you. Thank you. For the remaining minute or two, any closing comments, any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for answering that question. I do have a few final thoughts. And, you know, and first I just want to thank all of you for the roles that you're playing now, and how extraordinarily difficult it is, as well as now having the important work of selecting your next superintendent. I really hope as we move through those, I think you said 23 questions, 22 questions, I hope it provided an opportunity for you to really hear the passion that I have, but not only just as an educator, but as a community member. I love Oxford. This is where I chose to send my children. I came here tonight not just as an administrator. I came here tonight as a father. I came here tonight as a community member. I came here tonight with 2 boys that attend our high school. And I want to see this district rebound as well, to rebuild trust, to be able to do the things necessary to be able to move us forward. I also hope what you heard is that I'm not an outsider. I'm embedded within the community. I even used to teach here. I think I have a unique perspective, both as a parent, as an educator that was in this community, to be able to really help us move forward in terms of how do we give back a sense of safety and security, and having that be the most important work that we do over the next few months, while advocating for the resources that we need and making sure that those things are in place. I've been actively involved in that, and I'm committed to move forward in that work, as well as being able to make myself available for anybody in this community to be able to trust and support as your superintendent. I think all of those things are important as we move through the next several months. There's a lot of people that I wanted to be able to thank just for the opportunity to be here. I'm going to skip by some of those pieces, but I really wanted to make sure that there's a couple people that I want to draw back to. I've already had the opportunity to introduce you to Ryan and Laura and Cole. But what sits behind me too is Mrs. Anderson, my 2nd grade teacher, and how she really was able to help me as an elementary student, recognizing that I came to school most days hungry, and what that felt like, and making sure that there was something to eat, pretending that she had an extra sandwich, or my 6th grade teacher that was able to see past my toes sticking out of my shoes and determined that I should have been in the advanced math class. And I know that's the reason why I went into math as a profession, and then found out that I wanted to be a teacher. I have extraordinary people that are behind me and help shape who I am. And I have devoted my own adulthood within a career where I can give that back. When we think about taking care of our staff, I've spent a career of trying to support those teachers that did the same thing for me. I'm just meeting them at a different moment in time. I love this community, and what I can commit to you is to take the steps necessary to rebuild trust, to be able to rebuild that sense of safety and security, to reignite a passion in learning, and to be able to move those things forward in a very thoughtful and compassionate way. I do hope you'll take time to look at my 90-day plan, as well as entertain that book just a little bit, even if you just kind of glance through that, and then know that I'm available if you have any other questions.
Thank you so
Yep,
much.
absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate your interest in the superintendent position for Oxford Community Schools. The board is interviewing 5. You're the 5th. We will let you know which evening now is it? Thursday evening? Tonight. We will let you know tonight where you stand in our search process. So thank you for participating in this first round.
Absolutely. Thank you. I know, you don't mind if I come around, just, okay, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Very nice to meet you again. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for everything you're doing, I really appreciate it. Great. Thank you. Thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Thanks very much for coming.
Also going to scare you.
Thank you for coming. And for the book.
Oh, yes, yes.
About what's happening next.
Okay.
He's going to talk to us later this evening.
Okay.
For those of you in the audience, if you have filled out one of those evaluation forms, would you please put it in the basket? That's going to be right by Angela, so that we can get those copied, and they're going to make 7 copies of those. John, are you escorting him out, or are you ready to talk to us?
I'm ready.
All right, for everyone else, John is going to describe for us what the process is going to look like here as we transition, and then there's going to be that time for recessing to fulfill that.
Yes, so we talked about this the other night, but just to reiterate, so you had already had the opportunity to go through, reflect on the application materials, feedback forms, et cetera, interview notes on the first 4 candidates, and had a chance to kind of sort through in your own mind, too, where they rank going forward. And you've now met your 5th candidate. You're going to have additional feedback forms to consider. You have been given some additional materials. You'll want a little bit of time to take a look at that, too. And decide in your mind, too, where does this 5th candidate rank now as compared to the other 4 among your top 5. And you need to take as much time as is desired or that you feel is necessary so that you can be as thoughtful as you need to be and as confident as you need to be in coming back and saying, here are my top 2. So if you're comfortable enough doing that where you're sitting, that's fine. If you want to use some of the space in the back of the media center there so you can spread out a little bit, that's fine too. Even if you'd like to get a private space, a classroom, an office, we'll work to arrange that for you as well, whatever it is that you need. But whenever all 7 of you feel like you've had the time that you need and you're prepared to come back together, you want to be prepared to come back, and as we discussed, we'll go around. Each of the 7 of you will say, here are the 2 candidates I'd like to advance. I'll tally that. I read it back to you. You can make a motion, and you will select the 2 that you would like to advance as finalists. And then we'll get into further dialogue about 2nd-round interview questions, the 2nd-round interview structure, site visits, et cetera. We'll talk about the next steps in the process. So during this time, I'll even ask audience members, for those board members who choose to stay present, we're going to give them the space that they need. So they're not going to be interacting with one another. This is not a time for board members to be deliberating amongst themselves. This is time for personal reflection. So I'm not going to bother them. You're not going to bother them. They're not going to bother each other. They're going to take whatever time they need privately, and then we'll come back together.
And so board members, I would just suggest that as soon as you are confident of your 2, come tell me, and then I'll tally when we have all 7 of us in that state, all right? But just understand, we're going into a recess, which means we're not really in open session, and so there's no deliberation, no talking. It's as if you're not here and we're sitting in our living rooms looking at these documents, all right? We'll come back into open session, and that's when you'll hear conversation, all right? So thank you very much.
Tom, real
Yes.
quick, before we break as a group and we start deliberating on our own, can we have like a 5-minute pause before we do that and just get right after it, or?
Oh, yeah, you can take
Okay.
you can take a break. And Angela, you mentioned the fact that,
I'd like to get the notes.
yes, we're going to
Oh,
get
yeah.
those notes copied, but there's also, for all of you, there's a wrap. There is some chips and stuff over there, so feel free to have that while you're doing your work.
Time to say time for me. What time is it right now?
It's 8.
It is 8:14.
So you want to say whenever. 'Cause it might not be, I mean, all 7 of us are going to come back at a different time.
You're all going to come back at a different time, so
Gotcha.
we're in a permanent recess until you come back and tell me that you've got your 2.
Perfect, thank you.
And I would suggest you all stay here until we get those copies, and if you want to go someplace else.
That would be good.
Back and tell us, this individual got this many votes, this individual got this many, and just know, anything over 4 is above our quorum, right? Does it make sense? And so then there can be some discussion, but John, you want the secretary to take us through that process while you do the tallying? Call names?
Yes, just a quick, if I may,
Yes,
quick
please.
reminder.
Please.
You don't need to give a names in rank order in terms of preference, just you're indicating which candidates you'd like to advance. And just a reminder that we're limiting comments to what you want to say in support of a candidate. We're going to refrain from saying anything in terms of why we may not want to advance a candidate. Okay?
So, President Donnelly, we're doing the roll call order.
Correct.
Correct? So that would be Trustee Schaefer.
I would like to move forward Ken Weaver and John Bernia.
Trustee Foster.
I would like to move forward. I would like to move forward Ken Weaver and Dave Pass. Can I give a little explanation why?
You can.
For me, both have demonstrated known qualities of leadership and excellence. For them and for me, there would be no guessing or uncertainty. I also know that they already know what they're capable of. They both have extensive administrative experience, extensive bargaining experience, and they are already trusted members of TMO.
Thank you, Eric.
Trustee D'Alessandro.
I want to just say I'm impressed with all of our candidates. So this is a very difficult decision, and I'm proud of our district for attracting such talent. So with that being said, if my fellow board members would bear with me, I'd like to put Ken Weaver, Dave Pass, and Todd Bidlack, if we were to think about adding a third. There's just a lot of questions in my mind, and they're very, very close. And I need to this is a monumental decision for the board. And we need to make the right decision with everything that we can. And if that's the will of the board, I'd like to consider 3 if we have that opportunity.
Thank you, Dan.
Treasurer Bailey.
David Pass and Jill Lamond.
Secretary Hanser. I would like to move forward Ken Weaver and David Pass. Would you like me to, do I keep going?
Yep.
Yes.
Vice President Griffith.
I'd like to move forward with Dave Pass and Ken Weaver.
Should we keep going, or can somebody put forth a motion?
Yeah, we should hear from everybody.
Okay.
Yes, please.
President Donnelly?
Ken Weaver and David Pass.
So now we would entertain a motion.
So I'll just repeat back that 6 of you named Ken Weaver, 6 of you named David Pass, and then each of the other 3 candidates had 1 board member speak in favor of advancing that person. So I'll just say this real quickly before you go ahead and make a motion. I've only seen it happen once before, that every candidate who interviewed had at least 1 member of the board express support for advancing them in the process, which I do think speaks to the quality of the candidate field that you had here. And I think it speaks well of your district that you had 5 folks that you invited into interview, all of whom brought some very positive things to the table, all of whom are accomplished leaders, very skilled, very bright, and that they showed enough to you that at least 1 of you supported each of them to advance in the process. I think that says a lot.
I do too.
So now we look to put a motion on the floor. We have 2 candidates that have over 4. Ken has 6, David has 6, which naturally would have them advance to the next round. Anyone else that would be added by amendment would have to have a 4-person vote to be added as a third. So I guess I would entertain a motion to put these 2 in their rightful place and then see if any amendment carries 4 votes. Dan?
Thank you, Tom. Move to select Ken Weaver and David Pass as finalists for the position, for the superintendent position.
Thank you, Dan. Is there a second? Eric, a second? Discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
So just so you know, immediately upon conclusion of the meeting, before I leave the site, I will be calling all 5 of the candidates to let them know what the outcome was, and with the 2 that you've selected, to get them scheduled for their second round interview, which we'll talk about in a moment.
Very good. And also, board members, we got some more work to do, but John and I talked, and this would be a great time to separate any documentation that you have from the other 4 candidates, because John has not wanted us to have those and take them with us. And so you should be keeping only information for Ken and Dave while we work on the next set of exercises.
Right. No rush, but as we're going through this, if you want to remove those documents just as a head start, ultimately I'm taking everything back, right? But if you want to start with those, I'll take them off your hands. So are we prepared to jump into
We are prepared.
next steps?
Yes.
All right, so we have, we're scheduled for February 16th and 17th for the finalist interviews. Those will start at 7 o'clock each evening. And just as a reminder, we're going to have, those candidates will be starting their work day, their interview day at 1 o'clock in the high school PAC lobby, where they will be meeting throughout the course of the day with various stakeholder groups. The groups that have been identified, put this out there to you, make sure you're comfortable with this, and even the schedule that we've tentatively worked out, starting at 1 o'clock with high school students, 2 o'clock with administrators and directors, the administrative team, 3:10 with secondary staff members, 4:10 with elementary staff members, and then 5 o'clock with parents and community members. We would end that at 6 o'clock. The candidate would have a break of an hour. Angela's been kind enough, sometimes we talk about the option of getting the candidate off-site, taking him somewhere for a meal. We had to make this schedule so tight that with only an hour, that makes me a little bit nervous, so Angela's just going to provide something here on site. I think Angela promised she would be cooking for this. I'm pretty certain that's what I heard.
Say, I'll be cooking as
Oh, nice, Eric. Nice, Eric.
What was the date on that?
Those are the 16th and the 17th. And that's the reason we do, remember, 2 separate nights for your interviews, is so we can have the candidates spend the whole day like that.
Like one candidate is the 16th and one is
That's exactly right. And when I call them tonight, I'll get them scheduled on those 2 days and share that then with Angela, who can share it with you and get that posted, so everybody will know. Because again, as has been happening since our very first meeting, everything's happening in public, right? As you recall, I asked board members not to be present at these meetings, right? But what I do, so I will be present for these along with the candidate. I will kick the meeting off and just kind of frame it for the people who are there very briefly. But as people are walking in, I'm going to be handing them feedback forms. And what I'll be telling them is, you're not there because I've asked you not to be, so they don't think it's because you don't care, right? But also that because you're the decision makers, they might enjoy this process, but if they're not providing feedback, it does you no good whatsoever. So as I'm handing them the forms and explaining this, and what I advise them to do is, as they're listening, they can be kind of jotting some thoughts and some notes along the way, so that as it wraps up, they can be prepared to finish, hand it to me. As we've been doing then, when I catch up to Angela a little bit later, I'll be handing all of those feedback forms to her. She's going to make 7 copies. When you come for those 7 o'clock interviews that night, she's going to be able to provide you with those copies, and you'll have those in your possession, right? So that's what's all happening before the interviews start with you at 7 o'clock. So are there any questions about that part of this?
Right back here. The meeting right back here.
Well, that's a good question. What I had asked of Angela,
We're still working on the location, right, Angela?
Yes.
Because we may want to meet right at the high school since you're all going to be there.
well, that's what I'm thinking. You know, an hour is going to be a little bit tight, even though it's not a long distance, but, you know, I'm thinking inclement weather, whatever the case might be. What I don't want to do is have the candidate feel rushed and hurried at all. So ideally, with only an hour, during which time the person's going to get a bite, have a chance to unwind. The ideal thing would be if these stakeholder meetings, question and answer sessions, and the interviews all took place in the same location, so the candidate's not going to have to move. So if we can make that work, I'm advising that, but if it can't work, we'll do what we have to do. All right? So now, they would start with you at 7 o'clock, and so there are two things we need to talk about, because as we discussed before, and you had expressed interest in doing so, we would have the candidates each start with a presentation. I said before 15 minutes. I guess what I want to throw out to you is the last several times I've done this, candidates have a heck of a time keeping it to 15 minutes. I'll just tell you, 20 might be a little bit better. That's only 5 extra minutes for you, but I think it might be helpful to them. So if I could advise that, maybe 20 minutes for that purpose and then 60 for the interview. The topic of the presentation is up to you. It can be anything. My suggestion is that if there's a particular topic that's of serious interest to you, that you would like to hear more from the candidate on in-depth in an up to a 20-minute presentation, including a PowerPoint presentation, it's an ideal time to be able to really dive into a particular topic and hear this candidate's thoughts on that in that way. The other benefit to this is that you're going to get a sense of this person's public presentation style. You got a little bit of that from the interview, but it's different when you're standing and you have a PowerPoint and you're presenting. And what I typically tell the candidates to do is, as they're presenting, there's going to be audience members there too, be thinking about really kind of presenting to everybody who's in the room. I think that gives you a good sense too of that side of their leadership as well. So one of the things that I want you to begin thinking about, you can either talk about it a little bit here if you've got an idea that you're kind of dying to share, or think about it and ultimately share it, but we'll need to decide on that. What would be that topic? I've heard boards suggest, I've heard topics be kind of COVID related as we continue to kind of move forward from there. I remember one presentation being on third grade reading law and you know, what are we doing to help kids be successful and be able to be at grade level by the end of third grade or by third grade. Could be anything, right? But again, it should be something that you feel would provide a valuable insight and would benefit you in terms of your decision making. Do you want to talk at all about that now, or do you want to just kind of put that aside and know that that's something we want to get to?
I'd like to share one suggestion. Given the framework of our situation here in Oxford, for them to put their 90-day plan in a presentation.
And
I think the community wants to hear that. I think we want to hear that, and that becomes a measurable thing.
I have seen that happen before too, and I think that could be really beneficial. It's one thing for them to hand you something on paper. It's very different to bring it to life and present it. It's one suggestion.
Actually, go ahead. Well, I have a comment on that, President Donnelly, and I like that idea because in the materials that we have from Mr. Weaver, they were submitted before November 30th. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Not the 90-day plan.
Not the 90-day plan.
Yeah, that
Oh,
was right here afterwards, just for us.
I thought I was looking at something different.
No, that's okay. What you got beforehand was the application, cover letter, and resume, but the 90-day plan is what they handed to you during the interview.
I was looking at the date.
That's okay.
Well, maybe he prepared it then, but I don't know, probably not.
Okay, then just hold off for me in just a minute. But anyway, I'm supporting that, President Donnelly. That was my real point.
I was thinking along the same lines. I was thinking operationally focused. What does it look like to really get started?
Yeah, and maybe even week one, this is what I'm gonna do. I don't want a huge amount of detail, but I'd like to see a few steps in there rather than just general concepts. This is what I'm gonna do, and this is how I'm gonna do it, right? I'd like to see a real plan, not just broad general concepts, but how are you gonna do it?
Okay, so you'd like to hear a 90-day plan, but maybe with a specific focus on kind of immediately within the first week or two.
Well, kind of. I mean, that was some more detail as far as timelines. I like to see a
Okay.
timeline, but again, I like to know what are you going to do and how are you going to do it. I like to see specifics.
Okay.
Are you looking for metrics? How will the candidate measure success against those?
I wasn't thinking about that,
tasks?
but maybe that's part of it, right? Like, I'm going to increase safety at the high school, and this is how I'm going to increase safety, and this is how I'm going to measure it. Maybe, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not even a 90-day, maybe even like a 30 to 60 day.
Yeah. Well, hey, let's challenge them and say 90-day.
Okay.
Well, I think they both presented you a 90-day plan, didn't they, right? So,
Yeah.
so they've already kind of in concept have that, but now you're asking them to present it and get into
Yeah.
detail.
Yep.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Not that I don't think that those are good ideas, but I guess I want to know where they see us in a year. Obviously, the incident that happened in our school has been like devastating for a lot of people in our community, our students and our staff, with retention and I kind of want to see what is their light at the end of the tunnel, not just immediate triage. I feel like we've really just been in triage. These last 60 days has just been triage day after triage day. I just need to know if they're going to lead us, where do you see us in a year? Are we going to be getting out of the woods? Where are we going to be? Where are you going to lead us?
And actually that was on my short list of questions for the, second round questions.
Oh,
was
okay.
Getting into that, so that's just another suggestion, because
Yeah.
I think that is important.
Yeah.
So, this is.
Thank you. Thank you. All great points. And although we're ultimately the decision makers on who our next superintendent's going to be, whether it's Ken or Dave, part of that responsibility that we have is not only they're telling us what their next 90-day plan is, and maybe a little bit extended from that point, maybe what do you think we can be in a year from where we are today? But I think it's really, it's not really important. I believe it's critical that our community understands what our next superintendent's vision is for that time frame, 90 days, and moving forward, and bring it to life. Because I can read it on paper, but the person that I want is the one that's going to be able to bring that to life and bring it and put it into motion and get everybody behind them and say, this is the path we're moving, and let's go. And I also want to, and I've talked about this a couple times before, I want to make sure that we maybe think about, as we return from November 30th, it's important that we heal our community. But I'd like to see what our candidates' perception and their thought is, and I know it's tough because they're knee-deep in what we're doing right now, but how do we effectively change the way, and we asked questions about government, that interaction, how those relationships are going to change public education in the state, and how do we help the next school? Because unfortunately, November 30th is the last day. We've already found that out. So how can we be what we're asking everybody to be, leaders in a change? So and that can be very small, and just, but part of that 90-day plan, I think I would like to have them touch upon that.
If you want to try to combine both, one way to approach it, maybe this is packing too much in, admittedly, I'll just throw it out there, but could you ask them to kind of share their vision of where you would be after the first year in terms of, and whether you want to frame it around what happened on November 30th and the healing and progress that needs to take place. But what will they do? Their first 90 days, bear in mind, are going to coincide with the last 90 days of the school year, which is a little bit unique, but which also I think provides an opportunity. So it could be that. It could be, where do you see us in a year? Where would you like us to be in a year? How are you going to use these last 90 days of this school year in order to provide the impetus for us to get there?
John, maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be in that presentation. Maybe we focus on that first 90 days being part of the presentation, and then we build on some of the things that we're looking for into the questions that we're going to ask moving forward. I mean, those are all things that we can, it doesn't have to be in your presentation, but we want to hear that.
Embed them in the questions
Embed
for
them
that.
in the questions and how we move forward, because
That's a way of doing it too.
they're important.
Sure.
I
Important, think,
agree.
Not just to us, but to everybody in our community.
I'd agree with that.
So at what point do we come up with that list of questions?
We're working on that next, right?
Go there in a second.
Okay, sorry.
By 10 o'clock.
So, I'm not sure. I think what I'm hearing now is maybe that we're kind of back to saying we're going to focus on that 90-day plan.
I think so. And we can embed, make sure that we, oh, Corey?
And I agree, and I want to see that 90-day plan. But I also want, and I think the community would want to see, this Team O concept. That was kind of Tim's thing. What is their concept going to be? And maybe that's the 90-day plan into that, but what is the next Team O going forward? And what does Team O mean to them and carrying it forward?
I think that could easily
I mean,
be-
we say it a
that
lot.
Could, that could be embedded into that request,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, we say it a lot, but really, does everybody know, what does Team O mean? Show it. Put it in your presentation.
Like,
So-
who's the starting five, and then where's your bench?
Although, can I share this as a former superintendent? Let me share this insight. In part of what you gain from those first 90 days and from really spending the time, and you got two internal candidates, I know, so it's a little bit different, but listening, learning, really spending the time, getting a sense of, rather than saying, I'm here, and here's what I think, and here's what we're going to do. But you can use that time to really learn from everybody else in the organization, including you, frankly. And then be prepared to say, here's what I heard, and then based on that, going forward, here's what Team O means to me, here's what it means to us. So I guess what I'm saying is that it may be a little bit premature to ask them to go there. It may be that that's partly what they're going to gain from that first 90 days.
Okay.
Can we craft, can we maybe send our personal questions that we would have either to Tom or to Angela and say, here, just a time to, we've been through a lot of hours here, Monday, Tuesday, now today, just.
We're not going to pick the questions tonight.
Right, but just kind of.
Yep.
No, you chewed
Like
up
that.
all that time.
He always points back at me as being the guy that talks too much.
You've been very good tonight, Dean.
Without a doubt, as we're gathering those questions, certainly sharing them with me so I can start to create a list of them, as well as I would encourage you to go through the community's response sheets. I was talking to John. There were some really good questions at the bottom of those sheets,
Yeah.
and our public would like to know that some of their questions got answered. So don't make them all our questions. Make sure some of our questions are the same ones our community had.
So if I can ask this of you, then I'll keep it fairly simple. And we've got time, right? And we'll talk about maybe what's a reasonable deadline, knowing that the first interview is not till the 16th. But I would ask each of you, going back to your binders under tab 4, where you have first round interview questions, there's a sample second round interview where there are 14 questions there. And then you have also another menu of potential interview questions that has a lot of questions, right? A lot to choose from. You can use some of those All of your questions can come from there, none of your questions, but I'm going to point out there is a bank of questions that you can look at to help you. You can look at what audience members have provided as potential questions too. And you may have some things that now, given the two finalists that are coming that you're going to be talking to, that may make you think, are there questions that I don't see anywhere here, or I didn't see audience members submit, but I think this is an important question to ask. This is something that I think I need to know from both of these people to help me make my decision. So it can be totally coming from your mind too. And where you have some choice too, we only permit this in the second round. If you have a specific question for one of the candidates, right, specific to that candidate, all I would ask, I think that's okay in this round, but that you then have a specific question for the other candidate. If you have two specific questions ultimately for one of the candidates, you've got to have two for the other, and then you have the same number of identical questions beyond that, right? So what seems to work fairly well for us, you submit these to President Donnelly, but I would ask each of you to go through all of that and to try to limit yourself, I would say, to 3 questions. If you feel like, oh my God, there's 4, I'm dying to, go ahead, but don't exceed that. We only are going to be asking up to 16 questions in the second round. We don't ask as many questions, so it would be an average of 2 per board member. The way we ask them, by the way, second round, we don't do them in categories, we just do a round robin. President Donnelly starts, and typically I would just go clockwise facing the board, and we would just go around, and each of you would ask a couple of questions. If there's a little more than 14, a couple of you may get 3 questions. But if you would each plan to submit 3 to him, and again, if you feel like there's 4 and you can't eliminate one, go ahead. But knowing that of those 3 or 4 you submit, we're going to likely pick 2 of them, maybe up to 3. And again, just to reiterate, they can come from the questions in your binder. They can come from the suggestions that your audience members made. They can come from just thoughts that you have in your mind, things that you're wondering about and you'd like to know about the candidates. And again, if I would suggest each of you individually doesn't do this more than once, but if you want to submit a separate, specific question for each of the candidates, you can do that too. I would ask, if you're going to submit for one, think of a specific question for the other one too. And then we'll put them together. What I will do too then, when I put the binder together like I did for the first round, and I will do that again, have that ready for you, what I would make a point to do, so when you get those questions to me, Tom, I want to make sure that I know who submitted them.
Yes.
So that the questions you'll ask will be questions that you submitted. Okay? Does that
Dan?
make sense?
Yep, perfect sense.
Do you have a question?
Yes. I'm looking at my calendar as we're looking at these things going forward. So we're talking 15th, 16th is our interview.
16th, 17th.
16th, 17th, sorry. Yep. 16th, 17th. Site visits are scheduled for the following.
We're going to go to that in a second. Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry. Didn't
That's
mean to jump ahead.
no, you're fine. You're fine. We can go to it now, actually, unless there's any other questions. I just want to make sure I guess the other thing for that is, by when is it fair to ask that you submit those 3 questions to President Donnelly?
I think any later than end of day tomorrow.
So end of day tomorrow, I'm okay with.
No, I can't do that.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just
Monday?
not going to have time between now and Monday is fine.
Okay.
Monday?
Yep.
Gives you the weekend?
That works for me. That's fine. That gives
That's
me,
fine.
me plenty of time once I get them from Tom to get them ready for you. Okay. So, any other questions about first round interviews at all? Or second round, rather, excuse me.
How much time does the, do they have, including the,
So if we're in agreement, what I would advise them, what we would do is we would say there's going to be a total of, I'll start the timer when they start the presentation and set it for 80 minutes, an hour and 20 minutes. What I'm going to tell the candidates is that they should be looking at the balance of being about 20 for the presentation and about 60 for the interview. But what we're not going to do, what I don't want to do is time the presentation at 20 and cut them off if they're not done. I'm just going to tell the candidates, if you use a little bit of less time for the presentation, you'll have more time for interview questions. If you use more than 20, you're going to have less time for interview questions. Test of their leadership, right? They need to
Manage
balance
their
it.
time.
That's right. They need to manage their time. So, but I'll start the clock at 80, and there's going to be a hard stop at the end of 80 minutes. Same prompts of President Donnelly if we're running a little
Yes.
bit short. Okay, so the following week, site visits. And I think it's important that we talk about this because it's a little bit unique because you got 2 internal finalists. So the way it would work, and we have done site visits with internal candidates before, actually multiple times. We ask each of the candidates to arrange for various groups of stakeholders to be prepared to meet with a subcommittee of the board, 3 board members, so that there's not a quorum, right? Normally it's about a 3.5 hour time block during the course of a school day. So you would either do one of these in the morning and one in the afternoon, or most often boards will kind of separate them one day in that given week. It would be the week of February 21st. And,
Challenge, though.
pardon?
We do have a challenge is there's no school on the 21st or 22nd.
That's a challenge. Yeah, well, that would simply mean, though, it's going to have to be then 23rd.
Where they work, it's a site visit, right? So the board office is open and winter break doesn't matter.
But it would be also include people at the,
Yeah, that's
At
the
the
problem is they're going
and
to,
ask a teacher
yeah.
to come in on a day that
Sorry,
they're off.
sorry.
But that's okay, because even if it's compacted a little bit and it only gives you 3 days that week, you're only talking about 2 site visits. You
And
don't
they're
need any more than
in-house.
2 of those days. Potentially, you could even possibly do them both on the same.
Okay.
But regardless,
Yeah.
I give guidance to the candidates and tell them that what you're going to be looking for, what the board members present will be looking for, is that they brought a representative group of stakeholders to the table for you to talk to, so that you get a feeling that they're not shielding particular groups from you. It's a good cross-section of the people that they work with and for. And then those 3 board members have the opportunity. I'll provide kind of a bank of potential questions as starter questions that you can use or not. You can ask anything. It's an opportune time. If there are still things that you're uncertain about, wondering about, whatever the case might be, it's a chance for you to ask any questions of those folks and to get feedback. We may have talked about this before. The criticism of the thought of site visits quite often is if the candidates are picking the people we're talking to, they're going to pick people who are guaranteed to say nice things about them. What a waste of time. Why are we doing this? All I can tell you is that the boards that have done this before have vouched for this. It's one thing. I think there's some fundamental truth to that. It's very unlikely people are going to say, oh my God, do not hire this man, right? Nobody's going to do that, but they know that I want to say nice things. I don't want to hurt this person's chances, but how people say things makes all the difference in the world, right? How enthusiastically they say it. You look at body language, you look at facial expression, you look at all of that. The very last, I shouldn't say last one, couple searches ago, I had this conversation with the board. And the board president came back, and honestly, she was kind of astonished, and she said, oh my God, it was exactly like you said, where in one case, enthusiastic, heartfelt, emotional testimonials they were hearing from everybody. People were tripping over themselves. In the other case, people certainly said nice things, but it wasn't the same. It was absolutely different, and it helped them make that decision. I've had a lot of boards say that was a difference maker. Now, maybe not. It could be, too, that they're equally enthusiastic, and it really doesn't help you differentiate. That's okay, too. That's just going to reinforce you've got 2 great choices if that's what happens, right? But it also could be that you see enough of a difference that it might help you differentiate, too. So that's kind of in concept what we'd be doing. You tell me what you think.
And know that this committee's already been created. The 3 we already have.
Remind me of who that is, please.
Heather, Mary, and
Myself.
Corey.
Heather, Mary, Corey. Okay. What I would say then, too, the 3 of you decide, you don't have to do it tonight, but just you can let Tom know or even let me know directly. Which 2 days that week then? You only have the 22nd, 3rd, and 4th, I guess, right?
23rd, 24th, and 25th.
Excuse me, 23rd, 4th, and 5th.
Right.
So let me know which 2 days, and I would say too, give me a 4-hour time block within those 2 days from like 9 to 4. Within 9 to 4, do you want it to be 10 to 2? Do you want it to be 12 to 4? Whatever. You tell me those specific days and the block of time, and what I'll simply tell the candidates is, on this day, you need to prep, right, for this, with this time block, on the other day for the other candidate.
Do you go with us, or is it just like us three meet at central office and like we just walk around?
No, you're not walking around. What they're going to do is they will have these folks come together and have you meet with them. They may have them come together in different spots, and you're going to go from room to room, or they're going to have you in one room, and they can bring people to you, and they're going to be coming in and out. I leave that up to the candidates. I do give them a little bit of say in how they construct this.
So it's very scheduled.
It is very
Like,
scheduled.
It's not, we don't get to talk to anybody privately.
Well, you're a board member in this district, so in a way you have that opportunity. But no, it's highly structured. It is.
Dan?
I think maybe what we might want to consider is having backups in case an emergency comes up. We don't want to leave one group to
Have a fourth person in
three,
case.
and then there's an alternate
It's a good idea.
that could
Right.
say, hey, because the only reason I say is we ran into that problem
Sure,
before.
sure.
So,
Day and age, who knows?
What's that?
I'll be the backup.
Alternate? Everybody okay with that?
yeah,
Okay.
as long as we.
Chad will be an alternate in case someone can't do it.
That makes a lot of sense.
And then just to be clear, and it's good that it's the same three if possible, but those three then, the responsibility you have is not only the time commitment and to do this, but you need to then produce a written summary at the end of it that you're going to share with the other 4 board members. And what I want to emphasize is it's not a recommendation at all. You're not recommending, based on what we heard, we should pick this person. And it should be as objective as you can make it be. This is what we saw. This is what we heard. As objective as possible. And if possible, even if one person drafts it initially and then the other person have a chance to give feedback, the important thing is that the 3 of you are able to ultimately agree, yep, this is a fair representation of what we saw and heard. I think that helps guarantee that it's pretty objective, because if one person wants to say one thing, another person another, you kind of eliminate those things. What it includes are all the things that you can all agree upon. This is fair, this is what we saw, this is what we heard.
I'm sorry
Dan?
to keep this stretched on, but I just had a thought. So if our 3 board members are in a meeting with these different groups,
Mm-hmm.
is there any leeway within the interview process that could be recorded and we individually could watch it, not as a group, but individually? Because, as you said, the differentiator might be how one person answers a question enthusiastically, and that might not be able to be portrayed by our board members to another one. It's always helpful to see. I'm not saying we have to, but is that possible?
You could do that. In fact, we've been forced to do virtual site visits during the pandemic before. And so on Zoom, you can record those. And in a couple of instances, that's what we've done. We've recorded them on Zoom and then shared that with other board members. The only cautionary note is that it's FOIA-able, the recordings are, but frankly, so are the summaries
The notes that
you
anybody
create,
presents to us,
right?
wouldn't they be?
So I would leave that up to you, but I would say, is that feasible, possible? It is. Yeah, I think I would advise the candidates, if you would choose to do that they're going to want to advise the people participating in advance to know that this is what's happening, so that if anybody's uncomfortable with that, they would know that they can decline.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I'm not trying to add another layer, I'm just thinking.
And I don't think that decision has to be made today.
Absolutely.
Because that's a pretty big one.
Yep.
Because you got people getting recorded. You got to make sure that file doesn't get anywhere else besides just. There's some security things
Why would we record it? Like, what would be the benefit of that?
that you get to see. If you're not in the interview process, you would be able to watch it.
As,
You other board members?
Like, yeah,
Yes,
me. I'm not on the
yes.
committee of 3, so I could go to YouTube and get a private access, and I could watch it myself and have your notes and watch it. That's what Dan's suggesting.
I guess I'm just going what John was mentioning earlier. You may have 2 candidates and the way that they answer a question could be your differentiator, and I feel more comfortable with that answer than I do that one. And it's a lot of different things, and sometimes you don't get inflection in a written word. You maybe get that. So that's just my opinion on it, but
Yeah, okay. I don't like it, but okay.
And we're not making a decision
No,
today, so let's
absolutely.
talk about it and think about it, because I do believe there's some dangers with the file and access to that file.
That's like
You-
opening up a can of.
Well, you do have time. That's 3 weeks away, so you've got time
Think about
to
it, yeah.
Yep.
sleep on it, think about
That's
it,
great.
and then make a decision.
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll just might as well go there, right? After that, Friday, March 4th, coming back together at 6:30, selection of the superintendent, and we're going to replicate the process that has worked for us up until now, twice, where we'll go through and you'll call on each member of the board as you did tonight, and each of you will be able to say, this is who I would like for us to select as our next superintendent, to whatever extent you would like to, here's why. Consensus will become readily evident. You'll make a motion, you'll take a vote, and you will have selected your next superintendent. Just a reminder that if you haven't already, you might want to start thinking about getting a draft contract ready.
Working on that.
Okay, great. So that you can start the negotiation process virtually immediately once you've made that selection. You can provide that draft contract to the candidate that you select as kind of an opening to that negotiation and get that process going to wrap it up fairly quickly, hopefully. I'm getting there. Any questions?
Question I have is, because we have two internal candidates, there was I think there was like almost 2.5, 3 weeks before we anticipated the person starting. When you have someone internal, both on your current cabinet, can you accelerate that switch?
I would say yes, because part of the delay is that when you select an outside candidate, that person has to give notice to their current employer, and there has to be some kind of agreement as to how quickly they can separate, especially given that it's during the course of an ongoing school year. Totally right. That's a great point. It's an internal candidate, so that's just not a factor that would expedite the transition.
Okay, just want to, because in talking to Tim, I want to make sure that Tim, who is plotting his vacation days,
Right.
works with me on when that ends.
Gotcha.
And when the other person's life would begin as superintendent.
Yeah, but that's a really good point.
Okay.
That does make a big difference.
And the last thing that we need to think about is once Tim is last day, contractually and legally, he cannot speak with anybody in the district for 30 days. So we want to make sure that there's enough information given to that next person to get us through that 90 days. It's a pension law, if I'm not mistaken. There's a law.
My understanding of the pension law is that I don't know if it precludes somebody from just having, if your new superintendent just had a question for your former superintendent, I think that's fine. I think you couldn't bring Tim back like to work with your new superintendent for a day once he started that 30 days in retirement, right? But I believe, and ask your attorney when you're talking about
Yeah.
contract to be sure.
Okay.
I think just that type of a consultation would be okay.
And I think it's the only one that could be okay,
I
is if he
believe
has a
so.
question for, right? But we as board members should not be talking to Tim, and Tim
Right.
should not be talking to us.
But clarify that with your
I will.
attorney. Don't take my word for it.
Yeah, I will.
Yeah, for sure.
You all right?
Okay.
Anything else?
Not for me, no.
All
I
right.
think we're good.
Thank you.
You want both this back and then also the, our question, if you took notes on our actual questions, you want that?
Oh, for the other three candidates?
Yeah.
If you're ready to hand those over. If you're not, that's okay, but sure, I'll take them if you've already pulled those out.
And you're gonna be disposing of them?
I am, I'm shredding them,
Shredding, okay.
yes.
Angela, do we have anybody for unscheduled audience participation? All right, thank you. Thank you.
We're here if you want to have anything to say.
We have scheduled activities, number 5. I don't have anything under clarification. Board members, do you have anything under final board comments that you would like to have said? Mary?
I just want to thank all the candidates for coming out and interviewing. I really appreciate it. Thank you, John, for your words. I think it's amazing that we had such high-quality candidates, and they all, and as you said, there was a vote for at least each of them once. So thank you very much, and thank you to the community for their questions and for being here and helping with this process.
Thank you, Mary. Anyone else? Chad?
Yeah, so just taking off from what Mary says, I was just going to extend my appreciation to the community. The feedback that we got from the forms was invaluable. That it really gave us something to take home and to consider between interviews and really get a feel for where the community's head was at around these things. So very valuable, and I just want to make sure that it was known, that it's understood that we put the time into reading all of those comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Anyone else? All right, very good. I don't have anything under other. So, what time is it? It is 10:07, and this meeting is adjourned, and it's a great day to be a Wildcat.